Hey everybody, hope you're having a wonderful Thursday evening. Thanks for tuning in to episode 10 of your favorite class about the brass, Low Brass U Studio class. I'm Zach Marley, and we can't get started without our illustrious colleague, Mr. Connor Eisenmenger.
Oh man. Hello everyone. You said it really weird. I thought you were going to say it differently. Welcome to our studio class. We are so glad that you are here. All one of you right now.
Which might actually just be a feedback loop of you having it up in a different location.
And I do.
You know, what's the most comical thing about all of this is, I forgot to put my cell phone on silent because I'm incompetent. And you know why it went off?
Why did it go off?
Because someone tagged me in an Instagram story.
Oh. I don't know.
Who would do such a crazy thing while I'm in the middle of a live stream?
Definitely not me.
So
Definitely not on Instagram while streaming.
Right.
Definitely not what's happening.
You did not care how I played that Bordoni.
I thought it sounded really good.
Thank you. But yes, so we are live, and if you, for the one person who saw it, and probably actually zero, but if you want to go back, we have a new intro this week. Actually, maybe I'll play it later, and we'll get some feedback from the audience. We'll see what people think of our new introduction. That was, I spent so much time today. I definitely didn't take me. No, it only took me like 20 minutes or 30 minutes to do. But I did have to do some motion graphics work. It did take some effort.
It does take time.
But yeah, we have got a new intro today. Maybe a little bit later we'll replay it. So if you're watching this not live and you've seen it already, and just know that you might have to see it twice. But you can always advance the video and skip ahead. So it's always an option. But yeah, so Connor, do you have anything you'd like to share about your weekend or anything like that? If not, we can just move right past that.
Yeah, we can definitely share a little bit of stuff. It was kind of a busy weekend because I got married. That was fun. And you were there.
I was there. I even stood around, said a few words.
Yeah.
The mic may not have been on, but I definitely said some words.
The mic was definitely on. So I got married to my partner Christine last weekend, and we were lucky enough to have Zach as our officiant. Wonderful weekend. It was lots of fun. So it was our
I'm gonna request that you turn up just a little bit.
Yes. Like
Just get a little more gain.
Hello.
The sweet scent of gain. Yes, and now because we've been in person together, now we can do the amazing drink our low brass. I spilled on myself. We can do a virtual cheers. So I asked you to turn up the gain, then you immediately cough into the microphone. So rip headphone users. But yeah, so it was a fun weekend. You even had a jam session as a part of your reception, which was a ton of fun. I played the only tune.
I got that idea from.
Technically, mine was not a jam session, so
Yours was a jam session.
it may have ended up that way, but that was not the request. No, I'm just kidding. But I did play the same tune at both weddings because I know one tune.
I noticed that you played that, and I thought that at both weddings it was kind of an odd choice of tune.
So
it was nice.
I mean, it works. It works or it doesn't work.
Right.
Together is in the title. But
is Alone.
So is Alone. But it's now you're going forth in life, and before you were alone. Now you're alone together. It works.
Right. It's not really a commentary on the marriage. It's more of a commentary on my professional and social circles surrounding the marriage.
Right.
Because we're alone, but we're together. So it's kind of a blessing of the marriage. It's separate from the other stuff. Anyways.
It would be an interesting thing that we probably can't do is compare what I played over Alone Together 4 years ago.
4 years apart.
And how unfortunately similar those solos might be.
I wonder. I know we definitely have a recording of the one from last weekend.
Oh, really? I don't want that recording.
I'll send it to you.
I don't want it. Thank you. Message not delivered.
It's funny that you say that. We can definitely get a side by side.
Well, we don't. I don't think we don't have mine.
You don't have.
At least I don't.
Solo?
I don't have it. It's possible that someone has me playing trombone at my wedding 4 years ago. But your playing was awesome. It's probably the trombone that really did it. Having the right equipment really saves the day.
It truly does. And it was. I'm happy that we had that. It was a lot more fun than having to do like a first dance or something like that. My partner and I are not big dancer people, and so the reason that we had the whole session in the first place was because we were like not really trying to do a first dance. I mean, that's cool. Like people that want to dance, it's totally okay. But we were like, well, if we don't do that, we have to give the families something to oogle and awe at. So we decided we'll just like play a tune together really quick. So we did a ballad. We did This Is Always, and that was our navigation away from having to do a first dance. And then since we did that, we had a trio there. We were like, well, let's just have a jam session because a bunch of musicians are there anyways.
Right, and there was even a competition element, if I remember correctly.
There was, and we had the scat competition at the wedding, a feat of strength in and of itself.
Yes, that was. Did we have a scat competition winner? Are we all losers in the scat competition? No one wins. Okay.
Everyone loses. The rhythm section loses. The audience loses, and most importantly, you as the individual who participates, you lose.
At least it's fair.
It's fair. Yes, it's definitely a fair game. Very equitable. Everyone walks away with the same prize of just kind of being mildly disturbed. But yeah, that's something that they do at this at a venue here called the Owl and Thistle in Seattle, and they have a jam session where they will every now and then. There's no regularity to it. Just like sometimes the host just starts a scat competition, and it goes just like that, and everyone just kind of like gets on the microphone and screams, and it's awesome. So that's where that came from. I thought it would be a really good idea to kind of. I wasn't planning on wrapping up the jam session, but it was like almost getting to be about that time, and then after that, it just got so absurd that it was like, well, we don't need to do anymore. I think we're done here.
Yeah. No, it was about that time. I had to leave anyway to tend to some puppy duties. But yes, it was a lovely evening, filled with some lovely moments. But yes, so we had a great time this weekend, and we're able to be in the same place literally since we started this podcast or whatever you want to call it. We've not been in the same physical place since then. So what we should have done is had a stream during the wedding. That's probably would have been. We should have streamed the ceremony at least.
I know. In hindsight, I wish we could have turned the whole thing
into a low brass U function.
One gigantic stream.
Right, but again, hindsight's 2020.
What are you gonna do?
But awesome. Another thing that might be a little bit relevant to this this live stream is one of your quiz questions. So Connor had a quiz question, or one of our friends created a trivia quiz, and everyone took that quiz, and one of them was, what is Connor and Christine's current mouthpiece setup? Which of course was pretty obvious. It could have been a little bit trickier, but that's okay.
Obvious to you.
Well, I mean, I think it was obvious to more than just me. If it were all the same brand of mouthpiece, I think it would have been less obvious.
Right.
I think that's where because all of them were different brands, and we're big Dennis Wick supporters on Low Brass U.
That's true. I don't think that my immediate family is aware of. Well, my immediate family is, but I don't think my extended family
They might follow you on Instagram or something like that.
Yeah, I think one or two of them do at least. So
Right.
I'll have to let them know. I'll have to rep the brand at the next family function. Like, you guys
Right. Once you get your mouthpiece back. Mouthpieces. That's right. Our friend Luke sent me a picture right before he got on his, or I don't know if it was right before he got on his plane, but in the morning the next day, and was like, "Are these mouthpieces yours?" And I was like, "Nope," but I recognized that mouthpiece pouch because I was there when someone bought it.
Yes, you were.
Shout out to Houghton Horns for that Marcus Bona or Bona, I never known how to pronounce it, mouthpiece pouch. I just shouldn't have said it at all. That was my first mistake.
That's fine. Yeah, that's like the only like Marcus Bona thing I'll ever be able to afford. It was just the mouthpiece pouch, but it was cool.
Let's see. So Random Vids 82 has a question. Let's see if we can't answer this question. So, what would you recommend on how to count 12/8 ATSSB trebles? So I think I know which one you're talking about here. I might actually pull that up because we're set up for this. We can go both on the screen and we can answer your question. So do you want to give while I'm looking this up, do you want to give kind of a precursor, Connor, on 12/8, what's going on there?
So I guess 12/8, I'm assuming this would be the same for this context.
And it's a slow 12/8, but not in 12, it's still in 4.
It's in 4, okay, that's good information to know. So the bones of it, we can figure out from the keys and intro, 12 beats to the measure. The 8 just means that the 8th note is our unit of currency in which we are measuring the number 12. So there's 12 eighth notes inside of every measure, and if it's in 4, that means that we have, a pulse of 4, which means 3 eighth notes every single beat. So they're grouped in 3s. You can kind of think of them as triplets. That's definitely how I kind of conceptually group things together. Whenever I see groups of 3, it's kind of feeling like it's just 4/4, but every beat is kind of like recognized. I'm feeling the triplet inside of every single beat. So whether you say like count up to 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly, whatever you do to help count it, or there's many other types of counting systems that you can go with. I don't know the Kodai syllables for 12/8 actually. Haha! I should learn that. But yeah, we don't do a whole lot of that. Anyways, the important thing is that you're feeling that triplet sort of pulse
right
underneath it. So what do you got, Zach?
So I have the etude pulled up, Connor. You might be able to see it if you're looking at the stream. Yeah. In a perfect world, I would send it to you. But so it's this etude, and actually, why don't I just play a little bit of it? Yeah. And I'll demonstrate how I'm kind of thinking. So I'll kind of go in and out between playing it normally and subdividing what my head is thinking. So let's see here. So it's a little bit of that etude. So essentially, what I'm always thinking is I'm thinking that that 3 small beats inside of a big beat. So I'm thinking the 8th note pulse. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't really say all those numbers in my head, but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it with this one. And it probably gets a little bit tricky to see dotted half notes be 2 beats.
Mm-hmm, that's confusing.
So that's kind of an important thing to know. Your dotted quarters are going to be 1 beat, and your dotted halves are going to be 3 beats. So yeah, it's a little bit kind of tricky, but essentially the big beats have 3 eighth notes in them instead of having 2, like you're probably more accustomed to having. So making one thing that I'll do, especially in probably not for me, but you might need to do this, or it might be helpful to do. Not you, Connor, but you, the general viewer. But is mark where the big beats are. to me, that's a really quick solution to make sure I know what's going on, because I have all these moments in pieces where the rhythm, sometimes it's copy error where the editor didn't do a good job of making beats clear, or whatever the case may be, or it's mixed meter and there's this 5/8 bar and it's like, okay, so it's 2 and then 3, all these different things that can happen. But if I put those, I just draw little dashes above, showing myself where the beats are, and that kind of helps me. So yeah, this is a fun etude, but I know that the rhythm and the counting of it can be a little bit tricky. So kind of how I was playing it, if you were listening to that, if you were on at that point in time, it seems like we had an explosion as soon as I started playing, which is just a testament of how amazingly I played that etude. Just kidding.
Oh yeah.
There's a way better version already on the Low Brass U channel of this etude. That's not me just picking up this etude after not playing it since whenever that video came out. But anyway, so I'm making sure that I'm always thinking these eighth note pulses throughout all of this. Do you have any other?
Yeah, one thing to add, particularly on the topic of looking for strong beats, I would say that this particular edition of this etude is a good example of good copyist work, wherein you'll see, like, anytime there's a tied note inside of this, they're showing you super clearly where the downbeats are, and you can see that in the very, very first measure. So even though it's kind of confusing that the dotted half note is 2 like large pulses inside of our like meter of 4 and inside of our 12s, I mean, you can sit there and think, because you have a long time while you're playing that dotted half note, well, okay, so it's 3/4 notes, which is, if both of those are 2, then we know that's 6/8 notes, and if we group them in 3s, they look like this. And so it's 2 beats. By that time, you're probably already in measure 4. But if you look, I mean, the dotted half note is connected to, or is tied to...
The hip bone, right? Or no? Is that the wrong?
The hip bone, yeah. No, the beamed, we'll call that like big beat 3. So that would be otherwise known as, if we're counting 1, 2, 3 up to 12, that'd be beat 7. But you can think of that as your big beat 3. It happens again more obviously in the third system, like the very, very last bar. I saw there was a dotted quarter note tied to an eighth note in big beat 2, and that's going to be a big indicator of, okay, this composer or this copyist or whoever edited this grouping things in like 3 groups of eighth notes, because they would have just written a half note if this was in duple time. A dotted quarter note tied to the exact same pitch of an eighth note, that's a strong indicator that, hey, that eighth note that it's tied to is probably a beat that I should be thumping or thinking or counting in my head in some way. So that'll be a good giveaway. If you see tied notes, look for the big beats, and the big beats are going to be in groups of 3.
Right, and that's what it always should be in, or I guess should mostly be in 12/8, 6/8. Sometimes that's not true, but that's kind of our starting point with these complex meters. So anything with an 8 on the bottom, those, I guess I shouldn't say anything, but 3/8, 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8 most commonly are going to be groupings of 3, but there are going to be exceptions to that, especially when you get into more advanced music. You might see a 10/8, or you might even see a 9/8 that's something like 2 + 2 + 2 + 3. That's somewhat of a common one. So 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. I think that was the right amount.
Okay.
But again, as Connor once said, he got a C in calculus, or in algebra.
Was not allowed to attempt calculus.
Right.
And I got a C in algebra only because they allowed me to retake the course in high school. We won't say what our first grade was.
I think I did okay in algebra, but I will say I did not do so hot in calculus. Although I did pass the AP test. Humble brag, the minimum level of passing. But anyway, so
I have one more thing to add about meter stuff. One thing that's always tripped me up, and it tripped me up, I mean, it still confuses me, is the fact that we have like a compound subdivision, the triplet feel of the eighth notes, and then when we divide it further, even though the metric values stay the same, like the 16th notes are really felt as like a duple thing. So instead of like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, when I subdivide into 16th notes, my inclination is to go into another triplet, but it's clearly not going that fast in the 16th notes inside of this piece. And so when I see 16th notes in 12/8, I keep that internal. I still think the eighth note's 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. But I think I use the word buddy in my head. Buddy, 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 buddy. And that's kind of gotten me through like kind of figuring out, you know, the 16th note subdivision.
So I think it might be good for me to start maybe right here and play those, assuming I can play these 16th notes. I'll go a little slower. I know I did play these 16th notes, but let's do that real quick. Had to make sure that I switched scenes while holding that note.
Impressive.
But yeah, so I believe that's where the ATSSB cut ends, if I remember correctly. I did those videos a few months ago, so I don't totally remember, but I know it's not the whole etude for this one. I think that that's the spot. But don't quote me on that. But yeah, so those 16th notes are double the speed, or twice as fast, is probably a better way to say it, twice as fast as those 16th notes. And there still are 2 eighth notes in a regular quarter note, but we're thinking about how there are 3 eighth notes in a dotted quarter. So the math still kind of checks out, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think this is a great etude. And again, I always recommend with pretty much everything, but especially an etude like this, if you're struggling with that 12/8 sort of feel, making sure that you're subdividing it as you're playing. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And when I do that, I make sure that I accent all those big beats also. And that pretty much helps me stay all kind of together and keeps my mind right when I'm working on an etude like this. And you also may have noticed that I did some tempo fluctuations in there. And all that I might say is, you might want to look up some of these words if you're learning this etude.
I was going to say, there's a lot of Italian that, like, I don't know.
This book is really good at making you get out the dictionary or Google Translate. And it's especially tricky because they're almost always abbreviated. So your first task is figuring out what a fret period might mean. And that one's kind of easy because there's a bracketed word right next to it.
That helps. Why didn't they just write the bracketed word?
That's a good question. And then, so there are some tempo fluctuations and things that are written into this, which I'm going to guess that not everyone is going to do in their all-region audition. Just a guess. And, I kind of think about this being an open book test, and you have your notes. And you might want to put in your notes what these words mean. And most Italian, this book definitely catches me on some Italian. Most Italian, I've got down. Most German, I do not have down. And that's, anything German, if you look at my parts, it'll just be all written out. Like, I don't know any of those words, basically. I mean, I know some of them, but I know relatively few of them, and I'm afraid that I'm always going to forget. So one thing that I think I learned the hard way, and I'm assuming you've heard this story, Connor, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's not just about you.
Let's hear it.
But did I ever tell you about how I got yelled at in symphonic band at the University of North Texas?
I think we've had this discussion before, but tell me again.
So I've only been like yelled at in rehearsal, I guess like in college, that I can think of once. And that one time I can't remember what we were playing. I want to say it was Might have been Von Williams, Toccata Martial. I think it was Toccata Martial, if I remember correctly, which is a pretty common piece for band, and it's also a pretty common piece for tubas to be on a military band audition. Anyway, we were playing that, and I'm pretty sure the piece doesn't really matter, but there was a word marked on the page, and that word, well, let's just say the tubas weren't doing it. So we got asked what this word meant, and I remember not knowing and getting yelled at for answering, or I think I just didn't answer, or no, I answered, and Professor Fisher just yelled at me no, like really loudly. And that was the last time that I didn't have a word either translated or I didn't know it. So especially with these sorts of etudes, there are all these words in here that you may not know, and there's no crime in not knowing. I personally speak one language, and even then I don't know every word in the English language, but especially Italian, French, Spanish. I mean, all these languages come up in music at one point or another. I've even played a fair bit of music actually that's in Japanese, and I couldn't even come close to tell you what's going on, and I've had to have help from other people to know what the directions are. So my point is, there's no shame in not knowing what some of these words mean. That being said, you don't want to not know what them going into an audition, going into a rehearsal, anything like that. We always want to make sure that we're looking them up. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts, Connor, about that?
No, that's pretty much nailed it on the head. Is get your dictionaries out, and there's no crime in not knowing, but that only counts on the first rehearsal. And once you get your music, you gotta go figure it out.
Right.
I say this. It's more of a do as I say, not as I do. Sort of conversation that we're having right now, because I'm not always the best at looking up all little terms, but yeah, there you go.
I also, one of my other stories about it that kind of is relevant is just, I remember I actually had two teachers who've done this to me, where they had a little handbook of like this big of music words, and every time I didn't know one, they'd make me pull it out and flip through it and find it, and not the most fun, and definitely not the best way to spend a lesson. So
that gets annoying pretty quickly.
Right. So make sure that you know all of this stuff. One thing that I think might actually be helpful to think about, I'm going to get this off the screen just so you don't see how annoying this scrolling looks. But we're kind of talking about the difference between, or how we're thinking about 16th notes in a 12/8 time signature. Mm-hmm. And I think that this actually TMEA etude is kind of relevant for that discussion as well, because I think what you said, Connor, is true in some circumstances, thinking of them in groupings of two, but this is an example where that might not be true, but that's also a matter of interpretation.
Let's see what you got.
So this etude, which is, I can guarantee you no one is thrilled about playing this etude. And for those of you that are ATSSB in the state of Texas, or just fans of the Selected Studies Foxman book, this is a great etude, and it will show up eventually. But this is one where we're looking at it, Connor, and would you agree that it's always groups of two with the 16th notes?
I'm gonna have to wait until it pulls up on the YouTube screen.
Oh, right.
I'm seeing it now. Let's see. What am I looking at here?
So maybe look at the second line there.
Okay, I got you.
Right. So
okay, yeah. That would. It's definitely. I see you.
But there's an argument to be said that you can play it both ways, and I'll just play a little snippet of it, and I'll play it slowly and really overemphasize the two or the three. I'll play it two different ways. I'll first play it. Well, I won't tell you what way I play it. I'll just play it.
You're gonna. first time you were grouping it in threes, and the second time you're grouping it in twos, with the exception of the measure that's grouped in threes. I think that it sounded compelling the second time around.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, one point is that I'm not saying that you're wrong, that it can't always be groupings of two, but I think that especially this is an etude, and I chose to play it with the grouping of three.
Right.
But there's an argument that could be said that you start out with groupings of two, and then when you have those accents that are groupings of three, that's a cool change, and that's different, and it's makes it more interesting because there's a difference.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of it depends on what type of musical effect you want to convey, and I think either way, with the examples that we brought, I think they both sounded good.
And then there's the other side of this etude specifically. That's not how fast it goes.
Yes,
that was very much under
that.
tempo, and then as you speed it up, it might make sense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And thinking of it in six, that could make sense. But then when it's in two, how do we split up that two? Is it in four, or where does that kind of go? Because what it'll end up being, I'll play a little bit of it kind of closer to tempo.
It's like at that point, if you're playing the staccatos cleanly and precisely as you would, like treating all of them like the same staccato, and then the accents kind of tell the story of the meter a little bit more, and you kind of get that broad stroke context a little bit better. Right.
So there's that, and there's also the angle of most people at that tempo. I think that was faster than what TMEA recommends. I don't remember. I know with my video I played it on the slow side, but within the I think it was like maybe 4 clicks faster than the slowest tempo that was marked. So on the low side, maybe in the middle. But with this etude, most people at those tempos are going to have to multiple tongue. And then you get into the conversation of, do we do groupings of two, do we double tongue or do we triple tongue? Or for you personally, is there a difference? What syllables do you use? And so I got that question a lot on some comments on this video. And what I personally did, I played it as fast as I could while single tonguing most of it. And that's a personal thing, and maybe not everyone could single tongue at that tempo, but I single tongued some of the things, but not all of the things. And when I did multiple tongue, I would always do groupings of 3. So in my case, tuckata, tuckata.
Yeah. I love a good tuckata.
Right. But you could ta tucka tucka ta tucka tucka ta tucka tucka ta tucka tucka ta tucka tucka, and said ta ta tucka ta 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 tucka ta 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 tucka ta ta. You have options with these sorts of things. And then there's also kind of the hybrid where you do those double tongue syllables, but you accent them in groupings of 3. So ta ta ka ta ka ta ta ka ta ka, which yeah, there you go. But that's actually what some people choose to do. It's not what I choose to do. I've practiced that some. It never really works out the way I'd like it to.
Right.
But it's an option, and I think with multiple tonguing, because again, I've got a lot of questions about this etude and how to approach it. I can tell you how I did it. That doesn't make it the best way. That doesn't even make it the best way for me, but it probably was the best way for me. That's why I chose to do it the way that I did. It was a combination between what I musically wanted to do, which was that grouping of 3, and then the other side of it was what's easier for me, what have I practiced more of, what comes the most natural to me.
Right. It's something, at the end of the day, when you're preparing for an audition, especially if you're preparing for a school audition that usually has a quicker turnaround than the average bear, it's like you got to go with what sounds the best. But while you're in the middle of that learning process, especially when you're making like game time decisions of like what articulation pattern am I going to like marry myself to for this etude, it doesn't matter what you pick at the end of the day as long as it sounds good. But you also might want to ask yourself the question, why did you pick the one that you did? Is it because the syncopation of the music landed important accents or certain notes on syllables that you are unable to have like autonomy over your airflow on. Like, there's a "ka." Is it impossible for you to make your "kas" sound stronger than your "tas"? That's, that's really, really getting into the weeds a bit. I've been messing with stuff like that. I've been doing Clark studies right now where I limit myself to just doing daddle, 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 daddle. And sometimes when my slide direction changes patterns, or sometimes I'll do like kind of syncopated accents inside of the Clark study. And if it lands on a dol instead of a da, sometimes it ties me up. Like, either the note doesn't speak in the way that I want to, or the fact that I am doing something that feels like a downbeat and it's in combination with like maybe in a less than intuitive direction change of my slide, it messes me up. And so normally back in school, when I would just like do transcriptions or etudes or work on big band music or things like that, I would just say like, oh, I just tongue whatever's easiest because that makes sense on the trombone. It's like, no, I tongued what was easiest for me, and I was making these really antiquated tonguing patterns because there were some deficits in like the consistency of my syllables. And right now I'm going through a lot of legwork and catching up to do, and I'm way too old to be doing that. So don't be like me and get your "kas" together. Do all your scales going ka ka ka, or ga ga ga, or whatever
Or
you
both.
do that's on that. Yeah, or both. Whatever's on whatever syllable has otherness to you that you wouldn't, play a solo with. Maybe try isolating it and playing it by itself.
Yeah, and the other thing, you're saying make sure that you do the work. I would also argue that the work doesn't end, because with this etude, what it reminded me of is, man, I remember when I was pretty good at double and triple tonguing.
Yeah, that's true. I was a lot better at triple tonguing in like high school and undergrad.
Because I same, and I thought it was so cool. I thought like
just like pretty much played big band exclusively.
Yeah, it's just, and I remember in high school when I started learning it, or maybe I learned a little bit in middle school, but like I remember just thinking it was the coolest thing, and just like, I'm gonna get really good at this. And yes. I wouldn't say that I got really good at it, but I got good in the ways that you do when you're, not to speak for all high school students, but when I was high school, I got good at doing it one specific way, but I didn't have a broader knowledge. I could play one single note in the mid-range and just go really fast. Could I play scales and things? No. Could I actually use it? Sometimes. But, and I remember I played Scheherazade in high school, which is one of those double tonguing times. There's some da 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 da. There's some movement, especially in the trumpet parts, but even in the tuba part, but definitely in the trombone parts, there's some work in there. But yeah, so making sure that we're continually doing the work with our multiple tonguing, I think that that's a really important aspect, and it's really easy to slip up on it because low brass players especially, we don't use it all of the time. At least I know I don't. Now you get into those situations where you're playing some fanfare or something and you're like, oh, I haven't practiced this in a while. Can I still do it well? Right. And that maybe yes, maybe no. So it's definitely something you want to kind of consider with your multiple tonguing. But yeah, so 12/8, 6/8, and I guess we didn't even mention that this is 6/8, not 12/8, so it's a little bit different. But it's the same concept, and it can be extrapolated to any 8 that is a multiple of 3 on the top, basically. In most situations. Again, any grouping can be possible, and a composer could tell you a different grouping by how they beam things. That's another thing too that you don't exactly see in these etudes, but there are times where if I were a composer and I wrote this etude, I'll put it back on screen here. If I wrote this etude and I wanted to hear what Connor was talking about earlier, where it's groupings of 2 always, I would beam them groupings of 2.
Yeah.
And I think that and if I saw that, or if you saw that, there would be no like discussion of how we play it. That's how you play it. Same thing if we wanted to do groupings of 3, that's another thing. And I think this is kind of intentionally vague.
I would argue that this is worded. I think it's clearer now whenever you played it up the tempo that they have it beamed to be in a fast 2.
Right. And I guess that's another argument is should all but beat, of each of these 6 note groupings, are all 5 the same that aren't the first one?
They sure do look, and I think when you get to a certain velocity, and then looking at the accents, looking at the speed that we were playing at, and looking at the variation of pitches, that seems to be like the argument that could be made, is that we're feeling this big 2. It's always, the pitch variation always happens on these large beats. There's always an accent, and then everything else is relatively static or arpeggiating to the static note.
Right. So yeah, there are lots of ways to kind of think about this, to go about it. And at the end of the day, there's not one way to play this etude or any etude or any solo or any excerpt or whatever. These are just some of the ideas that you might consider thinking about when you're going about working on an etude like this. And what I would generally say is, listen to your teachers, and they probably have a good idea of how you should play it. But there, depending on your level of kind of development, and I guess not really development, but musical taste and musical knowledge, sometimes you can only sell what you believe in. I think a really good musician can play it any way, and you'll believe that that's the way they think it should be played. But at some level, I tend to like to play the things that I think sound good, and not what my teacher might say. I obviously listen to those people, and I'm not saying they don't have good things to say. But when it comes to these kind of splitting hair things, that it could be this way, it could be that way, sometimes you have to be true to yourself. But yeah, I like this etude. I wouldn't want to play it for all state.
Hard. This
was the one for me that, because I released most of these videos pretty quickly. This was the absolute last one. That was I was working, it looks like I wasn't working on it, and just like it just magically appeared. That was the one where it's just like, oh, that's the first one I was working on. I was practicing it really slowly with the multiple tonguing, da ta ta ka ta 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 ka ta 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 ka ta ta, just slowly, basically all the time from when I knew it was an etude to when it was released. So, and then especially with that one, another thing, kind of the unsung hero of it is dynamics. Theoretically, we should have a lot of dynamic contrast. Theoretically, and I probably didn't nail all the dynamics that time, or in my video probably. I'm sure that there's one dynamic. It's like, I could have heard more of that. I think about with dynamics about it being, you have to be able to prove them in court that you did them.
Right.
It has to be so clear that there's no even guesswork in it. Sorry, need a sip of my Lowbrass U branded water bottle.
A little bit.
Very nice. And these, actually keeps it pretty cool. It's just a great water bottle. Although I will say, having it now, the white does kind of get nicked up a little bit, and that's okay.
A little bit, yeah.
But it's it's not perfect.
Sure.
The mug, however, is definitely perfect now. But anyway, so making sure with these etudes, I know a lot of people are kind of getting back into school. I know a lot of the schools around Texas started today or yesterday, or
wow.
So making sure that we're kind of on top of all of this, and now is kind of the time for a lot of people, I think. So making sure with these all-region, all-state etudes, wherever you are, whatever your etudes look like, or pieces, or however you do it, start slowly. I think that's the best advice, is don't make mistakes early on, because it's harder to, don't make mistakes because you're going so fast that you're, having some issues. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff to do, but you'll get it probably, or not if you don't practice. It can go that way too. But rest assured, I think that there's some misconceptions about me releasing these etudes, because I do so many of them. One, even with this E flat major one, I played it before. It wasn't my first time. It wasn't my first rodeo. I'd worked on this etude before. I hadn't released it on anything, But it's not like I just flipped open the book and was like, oh, let's try this. Let's see how this goes. It took some work. I had to really practice for a few days, but I'd already put in a lot of work before that, because I had like a weird feeling in my stomach about this etude, because to me this is the one that exposes my weaknesses the most in the book, and so I wanted to be able to release it early enough, so I had to practice it.
Makes enough sense.
But yeah, Connor, you kind of had a little fun instrument repair thing this week that maybe you could talk a little bit about.
Oh yeah, I should talk about that. So, in a similar vein, I've been trying to get some more time spent on my Bach 42 than maybe I should have during the the shutdown and everything like that. I think that I took on a lot of great practicing projects over the past year or so. Not a whole lot of them had to do with classical music, and that was just because the things that I ended up having available for me to do were largely on the small bore, and they were largely jazz related. And so I took a little pause from playing and getting to do like my regular routine of large bore stuff. Anyways, I go to pick up my trombone the other day and go through a couple of exercises and just see how things are going. And this will give you an indication of how long it had been since the last time that I picked up my Bach 42. So I put it together, and I was going to depress the valve to check and see the action of it, right? And I noticed when I went to go press the valve, it was already depressed. And I was like, oh, that's great. I guess I'll just whip it back into, first gear, get this thing undepressed, and it wouldn't move. So I tried like really hard to move it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is stuck. It's jammed. I'm gonna have to like pay money to get this like repaired or whatever. And I was like, well, you know what? I'll at least try to clean it. So I went back to the trusty video on YouTube, if you haven't seen it, that the Edwards factory did of how to take apart a Thayer valve. And while it wasn't the exact same because it was on an Edwards and mine was on a 42, it was pretty much close enough. And so now, for better or for worse, I know how to take my valve apart all the way, and I highly recommend anybody who has one, like, play it more often than that, because it gets stuck. I wouldn't say everyone should disassemble their Thayer valve and mess around with it and clean it up. I can't professionally recommend that, because once I got into it, it wasn't like it wasn't like taking apart like didn't feel like I was looking at a car engine. Not that I would know what to do there either. But like it was enough.
It's
to be
not.
Like,
it's not the simplest of machines.
Yeah.
There's some stuff to a Thayer valve, especially, but any rotor valve, it's not the same as just whipping out a piston and unscrewing it and here it is. It's a little bit more involved. Even with a piston, you could easily damage it if you're not careful. But there's some stuff to opening up those valves. I only have one Thayer axial flow, and I have not opened it up. It hasn't needed it, and I've paid professionals to do it. I have opened up my rotors before. Again, I don't do it routinely. I pay professionals to do it, and it's not because I can't do it. It's because I don't trust myself.
Right. That being said, I just did it, and it ended up being fine. I think I was lucky more than I was skillful. But that being said, it was interesting to see what was inside of it, because it wasn't like when you clean out your inner slide, it's nothing gross like that, but it is like the oil and stuff that you put in there is leaving residue. It's like plaque, and it gets really, really sticky. And in this particular case, I don't know if it was the stuff that I was putting in, or if it was stuff from like the 90s. I don't know, my horn's a little bit older, but there was some stuff in there. All it took was I don't even think I used soapy water. I think I just used water, and I just kind of ran it through, maybe wiped it with a paper towel. I got a Q-tip and got in there, but it was nothing particularly abrasive. But that was enough. Just the residue of the oil was enough to completely jam my rotor to the point that with my hands I couldn't crank it back into place without thinking I thought something mechanical metal had been jammed into the wrong pipe. I thought something was I thought it was a critical failure inside of the valve. That's why I took it apart. It ended up just being gross. So I think that most of the issue that I had could have been remedied by regular maintenance and regular cleaning. I would say this is an ad for preventative maintenance. So I would say, without disassembling the valve, what is the best way to get in there to, like, would you recommend running like water through the valve system to clean it?
That's not going to, I wouldn't say that's like necessarily a bad thing. I think one thing that's important to note here is that oils theoretically are also cleaning agents. So that's why if you want to do what actually is recommended by instrument manufacturers, is that you oil your valves before and after you play every day.
Oh, really?
Because that after, what that theoretically does is kind of clear out all that stuff that you put in there, whether you meant to or not.
Right.
So I think if you're doing that, you wouldn't need anything like that. But sometimes just some warm water. That's when I got my F tuba. I think is probably the worst valves that I've ever had. Not necessarily my fault, but I bought an instrument, and what I was told is that it needed new valves, or it needed something, or new linkages, I guess, which is kind of separate from, that's part of the mechanism. And it probably still does need that new linkage, but the valves felt terrible. They felt absolutely terrible when I first got that horn out of the case. And I bought that on TubeNet, sight unseen, and I was like, did I make a terrible mistake? And then I ran warm water through the instrument, and I was like, I think it's going to be okay. Then I did it again. And when I say warm, just for the record, not super warm, like not hot, warm.
That hot is bad for lacquer.
Which this horn doesn't have any lacquer, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But still, let's get that message out there.
Right.
So I put some warm water through it, ran some, did that a couple times, then put some oil in it. Worked pretty well. Got it cleaned by a professional. And then it was like, these valves are pretty good. The valves themselves are fine. The linkages still maybe could use a little bit of something.
I see.
But I do want to get to this Schlossberg daily drills comment. I think these warm-ups are great. I always forget about these because they kind of come from a horn perspective. And so we don't think about them very much, but I actually queued them up here so we can throw them on the screen. So it's a book called Daily Drills. And I think that I've used them off and on. I think I found out about them. Actually, who told me about them first was none other than Mystery Jeffrey.
Really?
Our famous Mystery Jeffrey showed me these when I was like a sophomore in college. So you can kind of tell. I mean, looking at them, one treble clef, so you kind of know either horn or trumpet if it's brass, and just looking at it with the way that it's kind of going through the overtones of a French horn. But there are lots of ways to do these. In general, what you'll probably do is read them in tenor clef or a B flat treble if you're a trombonist or euphonium player or a trumpet player, and then if you're a tuba player, I would read them in treble clef, but down, 3 octaves? I guess that's. Let me correct that. That's if you're playing C tuba. That's how I would read it. Because these would go with the open overtones if you read it down down 3 octaves, 2 octaves. I don't know how many octaves. I'd have to think about it. C. Yeah, down 2 octaves, not 3.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's a good way to go about these. And these are just really nice kind of slurs and things that are really helpful. I've always liked doing these, and even though I haven't always used this book, I've always kind of done something pretty similar. If you've done a lot of Remington exercises, these aren't that far off from those. But they're definitely great exercises, and they don't get talked about enough, and they definitely don't get talked about by me very often. But always great exercises. And the book's not super long. Let's see how many pages it is. I guess it's 57 pages, but it kind of strays from being.
It's pretty long.
Well, not all of it's daily drills. There are some etudes in there towards the end, and I would say the beginning of it, and there are scales and things like that.
What is the expectation? How much of this book are you supposed to do daily? Like is it one a day, or is it you go through the whole book every day, or?
I mean, expectations are put on by yourself or your teacher, I guess. So it's a little different.
That's true. All right.
The long note drills is kind of the core values of this book to me. which is the first 10 pages. And to me, those are the ones that I've spent the most time on. I have played through this entire book once upon a time, or maybe not all the etudes, but most of this stuff I've at least kind of glanced at, or and some of it is more useful than others. Here's one that maybe not all of us would find the most useful today. It's number 46, so it'll pop up on your screen in a second, but doing some really, really large intervals, and maybe that's not so helpful for all of us. What would that be, 2 octave slurs?
It's quite far.
I'm
not doing a whole lot of 2 octave slurs in my daily routine these days. Maybe I should.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you can do it, it's not a bad thing to work on, but that's not necessarily what I would jump in and say. If you're not doing this, you're not doing things correctly. But
right.
there's a lot of good stuff in this book, and it's it's a horn centric, or it's for the horn. But yeah, I think that a lot of these. Or sorry, am I wrong? I think I'm wrong. I think it says to simplify playing of the trumpet, so I'm just completely wrong. We'll definitely have to edit that out in post. We definitely can't have that misinformation being put out there in the world, except for I'll forget to edit in post.
That's okay.
I guess I just always thought it was horn for some reason.
Unclear. I mean, the origin of the book, the pedagogy is sound across instruments.
Right.
It's kind of a chicken or egg sort of thing.
That probably tells you that I don't know who Max Schlossberg is. So, since I'm going to educate myself,
And me.
Yeah. Let's see here. So Max Schlossberg is from what is now Latvia.
Nice.
But moved to the United States towards the end of his life, it looks like.
Okay.
But yeah, was born in 1873. Cool. So, but yeah, I'm embarrassed to not have the correct information. I like to say that I'm either correct or quiet, and this was an instance of me being vocal and incorrect. But anyway, that doesn't matter.
We learned something today.
I learned something at least.
Me too.
But
I don't know where the Schlossbergs come from.
Right.
Now we know.
But yeah, so maybe we'll call it there, and if maybe we want to see, we're trying out a new thing here. We're gonna say Connor's gonna play us out, and Connor's gonna do some trombone playing live, and whatever mistakes, there's no way to edit it out. Actually, there is, but I'll forget. So
that's okay. It's better if we don't.
Right.
I'll live with it.
So let's do a little bit of that. Maybe let's get some levels tested just to see, obviously turn down the gain so you don't go with what you believe the gain structure should be.
Yeah, let me go to trombone level,
right?
Or what I think normal trombone happy zone, and you
so
can give me
before we do that, just like to say thank you all for watching, and we'll be back next week, I believe, to being on Wednesday. I don't think that there's any issue with that, but if not, sorry, or if there is an issue. But so thanks everyone for watching, and we'll just hope that the levels work, and I'll give Connor some thumbs down or thumbs up for levels if they're bad.
If I need to go either way, just let me know.
Right.
All right, here we go. There's about trombone quite low. Higher. Nice.